Hey, Shalom, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to say call hello, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shah, Ba'ashem, Rakah, Kodash. I want to send double honors to the apostles, elders, and bishops of Great Millstone. Much peace, love, and salutations to Yaki. I'm out there pushing the word of Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shah, and sincerity and truth. This is Brother Ariala. On this lesson, I want to talk about 501c3s and covenants with the enemy. And, this is something that we here at Great Millstone have been talking about ever since we've learned from our apostles. But us that have come through the awakening, and brothers that have history with maybe nonprofit organizations and stuff like that know about some of the pitfalls of combining the state and different businesses and Esau and what they have with this ministry. When you get into the scriptures, it's a revolutionary book, and it's not going to be pleasing to the status quo, and especially what the government and what Esau's got set up. So to link this ministry to something like a 501c3, you basically compromise what you're able to teach. You compromise, the integrity of what this thing is all about. Now, I want to read this scripture, and I want to play this because Charleston White speaks on this, and he makes some really good points, okay? In the book of Sirach, chapter 20, verse 29, this is in the GNT, it says, "Gifts and bribes make even the wise blind to the truth and prevent them from being honest in their criticism." You see, and when what we noticed when it came to the jab, these organizations that have 501c3s was actually promoting this poison to the people, man, promoting the jab. When it comes to speaking of the name of Yahweh and Yahweh Shai, a lot of these guys that have made contracts with Esau cut that out. They're relegated to following the guidelines behind some of the grants that they get approved for, or the monies that they get, man. Which is why you see a lot of these groups more, inclined to focus on community building, getting women all up in the congregation, instead of just focusing on raising up the elect men of Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai. That's not as profitable, right? And so these guys are compromised as they've taken on filthy lucre. Okay, but let me play this.
And I noticed one.
So he's talking about why he no longer would be a part of community outreach programs and stuff like that, because he was heavy. He's from Fort Worth, Texas. All right, and he's very, very big in the community, doing a lot of stuff, not just in Fort Worth and in Texas, but actually around the states. And so he's talking about one thing that they were trying to do as far as keeping juveniles from getting life sentences in prison. And this is what he says. Let me turn it up.
Once we went back home, let me just say this. The last night before we would leave, they would do a fundraiser. And we would go to this building that when you look outside the windows, you can see Capitol Hill, you can see DC. It was a great view. And they would have all the lobbyist organizations that you can think of who would be in support of this bill. The NFL, Starbucks, it was so many people. So they would do a fundraiser. Our last night there. And they would get all of our stories, and they would tell our stories to a group of millionaires, a group of congressional members. And once they get through telling our stories, they would say, "Pull out your phones and y'all donate." And I would watch these people raise millions of dollars because the Campaign for Sentencing of Youth, the Incarcerated Children Advocacy Network was all 501c3s. So I started paying attention and understanding the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4. One of them is a nonprofit, one of them is a for-profit. And so I started noticing that when we go to Washington, D.C. every year, homie, when it's time to fly back home, they done raised all this money, but they're not helping us with our little small organizations back home. They're not helping us pay the parking fees that we done accumulated when we get back home. So we done spent a week up here, homie. So some people struggling to pay their phone bill. So I noticed they wasn't helping to empower and equip us to be better community leaders when we got back home. It was all for us to come up here and they raise money to pay their salaries, to pay their lights.
Off your story, off their back.
Yeah, homie. And they get the recognition. These are their careers. So I had my own nonprofit at the time, and so I would peep and game. And so this one particular time I was coming back from Washington, D.C., and at the time there was a guy by the name of Bart LeBeau. Bart LeBeau was the executive director of the Annie Casey Foundation. And anybody familiar with the Annie Casey Foundation, they are a 501c4 who gives money to the 501c3s throughout America, based out of Washington, D.C. So you can't get a bigger grant than the Annie Casey Foundation. So,
and this goes for a lot of different groups and how they have it set up. They have a larger entity that basically branches out and gives grants to the 501c3s. And just like we've been telling you, you can't just get these grants without following certain guidelines and stipulations. Okay? And and Jake has pretty much sold themselves out to their masters just to get these grants. They won't tell you up front. They'll dance around it, but this is what's going on, man. Our people are wicked. You know, First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 11, you know, this is an account of back in the time of the Greeks where our people were selling out, you know. Verse 11 says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. All right. So this device pleased them well. And just like today, we have wicked people amongst the wicked amongst our people making covenants with the heathen. You know? Verse 13 says, then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. See? And that's what Charleston White is explaining. I'm going to let him continue. But our people do this, man. Then and just put the title Israel in the name of their building. But it's full of dead men's bones.
At the time, Mr. LeBeau, Bart was the executive director. So his wife was doing she was doing a retreat in Louisiana, like right outside of Baton Rouge. So I flew from DC, went to Baton Rouge and stayed at Bart's house for a couple of days. And Bart is a former member of the Weather Underground. If you're familiar with those people, man, back in the 60s and the 70s. So he had this vast bookshelf of books on me. So I was just checking out all these books because I'm fascinated by books. And I saw this one book in particular that's called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. So I grabbed that book, man, and Bart seen me grab it. And he told me I can have it. And this book that's called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded is written by the Women's Jewish Council. And the book, The Revolution,
listen to what he's about to say,
will not be funded. It breaks down why, how, that we have nonprofit organizations in America. It's called the nonprofit industrial complex. And so you wonder why so many...
That is fascinating. The nonprofit industrial complex. Hold on just 1 second. So I had to do it. I went to Gronk, right? And I typed in what is the nonprofit industrial complex in a couple of paragraphs. Let me read this. It says the nonprofit industrial complex refers to the intricate relationship between nonprofit organizations, right? Like IUIC, ISUPK, so on and so forth, right? Government entities and corporate interests that often shape the priorities, funding, and activities of the nonprofit sector. It describes a system where nonprofits, originally intended to address social issues and promote justice, can become co-opted or influenced by the very power structures they aim to challenge. Right? So if you're out there preaching, we the Israelites, so-called Esau is gonna go down. You don't become a part of his system. What you see is what? Oh, let's take the name away and let's just say Christ. Go out there and get that jab. That so-called white man, he's smart. And they're going to get people to take the chip as well. All right? It says this dynamic emerges largely due to the reliance of nonprofits on funding from wealthy donors, corporation, or government grants, which can steer their missions toward maintaining the status quo rather than fostering radical change. Critics argue that this creates a professionalized activism landscape where grassroots movements are sidelined in favor of well-funded organizations that align with elite interests. This is why you see these groups out of nowhere that become upgraded and become polished. The term gained prominence through works like The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, edited by Insight, Women of Color Against Violence, which critiques how the nonprofit industrial complex commodifies social justice efforts. For example, large foundations may prioritize measurable outcomes or apolitical projects such as service provision over systemic reform, limiting the scope of what nonprofits can achieve. This can lead to a cycle where nonprofits compete for funding, moderate their goals to appeal to donors, and avoid confronting the root causes of inequality like capitalism or militarism. While not all nonprofits fall into this trap, the nonprofit industrial complex highlights a tension between survival of a funding dependent world and staying true to transformative ideas. So you think these people that are in these 501c3s are able to stay true to the doctrine of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua? Absolutely not, man. The scriptures tell us not to make these type of deals. Exodus 34:12 says, "Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee." See? And that's what's happened. That's what's happened to our people, man. Bar none. They've been snared by taking on these deals, okay? So I'm going to go back. I'm going to let Charleston White continue. I just wanted to pull that real quick.
Why? How? That we have nonprofit organizations in America. It's called the nonprofit industrial complex. And so you wonder why so many black people, when they become successful, want a nonprofit. Well, in this book, it breaks down, the Jewish Council breaks down why nonprofits were created in America. Nonprofits were created to hinder and control social movements after the civil rights movement. So that's why your churches are nonprofits, because they are now a controlled movement. So once I read that book, homie, and understood that book, there was no way I can continue trying to help my community with a 501c3. The revolution will not be funded. Why do you think it's so many black people with nonprofits and they rely on funding? A nonprofit is a poor beggar. You don't see black people trying to set up 501c4s. Everybody's going to a 501c3, including the church, tax exemption. So when they created that, so when George Bush came along and George Bush created a national initiative that was called a faith-based initiative. This faith-based initiative allowed the church and state to get in bed with each other. And church and state is supposed to be separate based on the Constitution. Why do you think they have political meetings and let political candidates come to the church and speak at the church? That shouldn't be allowed. Church and state is supposed to be separate. So now all of your black churches are now 501c3s who give tax exemption from the government. They can't even speak against the government. They'll lose their tax exemption status.
And this is what we see happening to these so-called Israelites. This same thing. And what happens is over the course of just us being here since 2007, these groups get more and more and more watered down. and more status quo. It ought not be so. Isaiah 31:1 says, "Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong, but they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord." That's why they take away the name and do all the other stuff that we talked about. Okay? You know? You see? This is what's happening. Yet he also is wise and will bring evil and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of them that work iniquity. See? Most High is going to deal with these groups. They're going to deal with Esau. And like the scripture says, though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not go unpunished. The wicked are not going to go unpunished, man.
That is. So once I read that book, homie, it changed my whole outlook on, we can't, man, I don't need no 501c3, so I let my 501c3 go. The revolution will not be funded. So I looked out into the community, homie, and I started shaming the community to try to help me. I'm going to call the police on you, bitch ass, for not.
And he making sense, too. Okay? And it's funny that this guy who talks down on the Israelites at times is making more sense than people that call themselves the men of the Lord. You know? Last one we'll read, man, and close it out. And if brothers wanted to add into the chat or the comment board, please do. Isaiah 28:13 says, "But the word of the Lord was unto them precept upon precept." Salakia. That's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. I want 14. It says, "Wherefore hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men that rule this people which is in Jerusalem, because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hid ourselves." You see? But what's actually going to happen is what we read earlier. The Most High is going to set evil and set fire to all of this stuff, man. So I felt like this was a very intriguing comment, and it really highlights something that we've been saying for quite some time. So, Lord willing, this is edifying, man. Like I said, man, double honors to the apostles and elders. Well, first I want to say, Call Halal Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushua, Ba'Shem Rakar Kodash. Double honors to the apostles, elders, and bishops of Great Millstone. Much peace, love, and salutations to Yakim out there pushing the word of Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahushua, sincerity and truth. Shalom, man.